Dear Miss Knapp, I just wanted to say thanks again for your continued service to the Fairfax County Criminal Justice Academy. As you know, we train the new recruits, future law enforcement officers of the Fairfax County Police and Sheriff's Offices, Fairfax County Animal Protection Services, the town of Vienna, and the town of Herndon. Over the past several years, you have been taking time out of your busy schedule to help the recruits in the recruit training as it relates to domestic violence. Since we instruct well over 100 recruits a year, your story and words of wisdom have quite a large influence on the first responders of the law enforcement community. Your presentation, not only about your past, but also about some of the critical things that recruits should keep in mind in relation to those types of incidents, is truly valuable. As an instructor, I can teach them to respond to domestic disputes and assaults, how to investigate, how to talk with people, how to empathize with victims, etc. What is great about your perspective is that it really hits home about the true impact of these cases, what a victim, future survivor's mindset is, why people stay in these relationships, etc. Without fail, after every one of your heart-to-heart style talks, recruits come up and tell me, "You are one of the most moving and powerful guest speakers that we bring to the Academy." Overall, thanks so much for your dedication to enhancing the skills, knowledge, and mindset of the recruits who attend the Academy. I am 100% confident that it has made a difference in the real world, and that is so important as via indirect contact you have helped countless community members. I appreciate your service and I'm honored to work with you. MPO Jared Evans. Hi, my name is Debbie Knapp. My TDOC number is 97664. I've been where you are, not necessarily in Henning because Henning wasn't open. I went to Tennessee Department of Corrections in TPW in 1982. In 1974, my first husband and I separated. After I was married. I married when I was 16, left home when I was 15, had 2 children. We were living off of our friends, family, in the church because he didn't work. He was lazy, and he always had problems finding a job. The big problem was the jobs don't come and knock on your door, and he didn't go knock on theirs. Once I realized that it was going to be up to me to take care of the children and myself, that he was not or could not do it, I went out and found a job. Dawned on me, why am I supporting a man? I'll just support me and the 2 kids, so I left him. Well, not long after that, I made friends with a couple of guys that came into the Smokey the Bear. It's like a 7-Eleven. And we started talking and hanging out and found out about smoking pot. And they were getting ready to join the military, and they were always kidding about it. And I laughed and told them that if I was going to go in the military, I was going to go Air Force so I could fly everywhere instead of walk or ride on a boat, which planted the seed. And I did go. I joined the Air Force. I did, when I was going to school is when I met my second husband, John. And he was in school and so was I. Well, he dropped out of school but continued to stay on base. And we dated. When I left Chinook Air Force Base and went to my home base, which is in Little Rock, Arkansas, John came with me. Wasn't long after that, I was pregnant with my 3rd child, active duty, and John was looking for jobs. So as we got more involved, he got more verbally abusive. And wasn't long after the initial verbally abuse, he got physically abusive. This was in 1974. In 1980, I had had all that I could take. I knew that it had to be one of us, either me or him. And I started thinking about ways out. Well, I had another friend who was more than willing to introduce me to her boyfriend and a friend of his, and I asked the friend of his to kill my husband. I tried to do a pay for hire killing, and he backed out. But he was willing to sell me the gun, which I did purchase from him. I really still at that point did not know if it was going to be John or me, because I was so distraught. I was also very heavily self-medicated. The good thing about pot is it numbs you. So I did not feel, I did not hurt as bad. But when it numbs you, I also was not aware, or as aware as I should be, of the effect that it would have and how either my death or his death would affect our families, our children, and any of that. And I made a terrible decision in April of 1980. I killed my husband, and I don't want to say I rejoiced, because I didn't. I did have relief from his death, because me and the children were no longer going to be abused. But on the other hand, I found out that I lost the man that I loved. And I talked about that in other times, but I loved John. I loved him with all of my heart. I made a commitment, and I was willing to stand by it. I loved John, the good guy, and I missed him when he died. And I grieved. And while I was grieving, here I am. I had killed him. At that point, the police had not questioned me, but obviously they were looking into me, but they hadn't questioned me. But I was so distraught about what I had done, the reality of his death, that I couldn't deal. I couldn't sleep. When I did sleep, I had terrible nightmares, and I went through pretty much hell at the time. And the only comfort, if I can say there was comfort, was in my closet. I sat in the closet with a .45 and prayed that God would take my life. Now I'm thinking death. When I prayed and asked God to take my life, I was thinking death. And the .45 was there, but I had already seen the pain of John's death, how it affected not only me and my children, but his parents and even my mother, and knew that I had caused them all so much pain that if I died, it would just be for naught, and they would suffer even more. So, through the grace of God, I did not pull the trigger, not because I didn't want to. I guess it was just because I kind of put it off. But I did many, many times, and I'm talking over 2 weeks, a month, ask God to take my life. Well, many years later, it dawned on me that he really did, just not the way that I thought, not by death, but by change. And by change, he sent a redeemer to me in the form of a biker, because to be my, I don't know, he took care of me. He just literally through a mutual friend. I have a lot of those, don't I? And he introduced me to Snake. Snake was a biker, and Snake was mean. He wasn't really mean, but he looked mean. He was redhead and carried himself where you didn't want to mess with him. But on the inside, he had a heart and knew that I needed a friend. I didn't need a boyfriend. I needed someone to come in and help me, because I wasn't able to do it on my own. So I went on the run with Snake. In 1982, they picked me up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and transferred me back to Tennessee, where I was supposed to go to trial. I had a court-appointed attorney. All of y'all are very aware about court-appointed attorneys. Unfortunately, I wasn't at the time, but he had a couple of men clients that were also going through a murder trial. So he didn't really have time to even come and visit me. I only saw him twice before I was supposed to go and have a jury trial. They were pushing for the death penalty, first-degree murder. It was in 1980 that I committed my crime, so it was long before domestic violence, or you heard anything about that. So I didn't have a defense, or that's what he told me. Self-defense was not a thing in 1980, not in Tennessee. So with no defense, it was life or death, and they were pushing for the death penalty, and continued to push for the death penalty until about just a couple of days before my jury trial was supposed to start. And one day, the attorney came to see me. I was in shock because I hadn't seen him in all that time, 6 months, only twice. And he told me that they had offered a plea of life in prison. And that was the best I could ever hope for. But I could take my chances and go to trial. And I thought, no, I don't want to go to trial, because the publicity had finally started dying down, and my mother and my kids were getting a little breath of air of a normal life. So I didn't want to cause pain again for them. So I took life in prison. Now, the attorney told me we were looking at 10 years. I'd go up for parole. I'd make parole because I wouldn't do anything to make it different, right? And I thought, okay, fine. So I took the time. I was transported to TPW 2 days before Thanksgiving in 1982. Went to the Little House, for those of you that remember the Little House, and looked around because I thought I had 10 years to do. In 10 years, I turned 30 a little over a month after I arrived in the Little House. 10 years was a long time. 10 years without my kids was almost unbearable. But so I thought, I'll find somebody that I can do time, show me how to do time. So once I got out of the Little House and I was out in population, I started talking to all of the different women to find out who had done 10 years or close to 10 years and how they did it, and basically to teach me the ropes, because all of y'all know life is totally different on the inside than it is on the out. The hierarchy is a whole lot different. The staff is one thing, but the inmates and all of the little groups is entirely another thing. And that was my world. Those were my people. And I needed to know how to do time. So I interviewed inmates. Who else do you talk to? Well, I didn't find anybody that I wanted to do time like. I found a lot of people who were bitter and angry. It was the man's fault or the woman's fault or whoever they had committed the crime with, or felt like they had to do the crime for. Or it was the institution's fault, that what they were doing really should not be against the law, but it was. So I found a lot of bitter, angry people. I didn't find anybody that I truly wanted to be like. I didn't fit in. I never fit in. All of my life, I never felt like I fit in. I didn't fit in with my family, didn't fit in with society. And then I go to prison, and you'd think I'd fit in, but I didn't. I was still an outsider. I was there for first-degree murder. Well, that puts you in a whole different stigma. And there weren't very many. Blanton had been in office, and he granted clemencies to anybody that was a lifer that had money and could buy their way out. And that's what most of them did. So here I was, a lifer in prison for killing my abuser, and I had no peers. I was the only one there. Not the only murderer, but the only abused woman who struck out and killed her abuser. I was the only one. So I couldn't find anybody I wanted to do time like. I found a lot of things that I didn't want to be. I did not want to be bitter. I did not want to be angry. And I started noticing that there were self-help groups. Some of them were really valuable. Some of them were a joke. But any group that you can get into, you should, because you can learn from them. Just like I learned from my peers, the other people that were in there for murder or for crimes that got you at least 10 years to do. So I started reaching out to groups. I got a couple of pretty sweet jobs that gave me a lot of experiences, some of them good, some of them bad. Hopefully I learned a little from wherever I was. But I finally got to go up for parole. Wasn't 10 years, wasn't even 15. 21 years, 3 months, and 19 days later, I left prison. I made parole. First time I had ever been up. First time that a battered woman had gone before the parole board. And they granted me freedom. They gave me hope, and they gave all of my friends who came after me hope. It was a big deal. So I made parole. I went to live with one of the women that I met in one of the self-help groups, who became my mentor and offered me a place to live, offered to help me with my transition back into society, which was scary. The world was totally different. I mean, good heavens, my kids were grown. I was a grandmother. Everything had changed. Not only had my world changed, and all of the coping skills that I learned in prison were no longer valid. I had to find new coping skills. I had to depend on all of the lessons that I had learned while in prison. And if you want your life to be different when you get out, you have to make a difference while you're in. You have to learn, and you have to have all of the experiences that you can. Because if you leave prison and you go right back into where you lived before, what you did before, it's the road to go back. And I didn't want to go back. 21 years was a major lesson for me. I did not want to have to experience any of that. So when I got out, I, of course, saw my children and my grandchildren, my family. I loved them dearly, but I needed stability. And luckily, I was given that in the form of a mentor. And I was very lucky. Was I any more blessed than you can be? No. Because you remember when I told you that I was in the closet and that I asked God to take my life? It was about that time that I realized He did. He took my life. He gave me mentors. He gave me people like Brother Dave, which I know some of y'all know who he is. I learned many, many lessons from him. I learned from Ruth Paley, who taught the VOE class, who gave me skills. First I went to her class, and then I was her teacher's aide for 7 years. I learned a skill that I could use once I got out, which I have. I work in a really nice office that we're going to get to in a minute, but that's because of what I learned in prison. The biggest thing that I learned in prison is if you want different, then you have to do different. So that's one of the things I would share with you. If you want your life to be different than it was before you went to prison, then you're going to have to make the changes in yourself so it can be different. So here I am. I got out. I had help. I got my first job, scared to death, to go up for an interview, and I went to work at the public library. And I was entry level, and I worked in distribution, which means I carted all those books that came in and took them up, put them in order by the Dewey Decimal System, and put them on shelves for people to come and pick and take home and read and enjoy. That was my first job, and I was lucky and blessed to get it. Well, I moved on from there and went to work for a cleaning company, and I was an assistant manager, and that was pretty cool. I kind of liked it, but I always wanted different. I wanted to move up. I wanted to use the skills that I had learned. So I started looking for another job. Well, in the meantime, my friend, who I was still living with 3 years later, had a family crisis and needed to move to Virginia. Well, that was pretty scary to me, to think that the stability that I had found was going to be gone, and they were going to move to Virginia, her and her family, and I was going to be here or there in Memphis, and I wouldn't have that stability, so I was afraid again. But things change. So when I do talk to groups as much as I can, and there's usually 3 truths that I tell, but for y'all I'm going to add an extra one. There are 4 truths. One is that after I had been out of prison for almost 3 years, that I would have the opportunity to make a DVD for the YWCA. I really wanted to be able to go into the safe homes and talk to the battered women and tell them, you don't want to do what I did. You have better opportunities. I had no one to go to, but you do. Here are the different programs. Here are the things. And this is the reason why you don't want to go to prison. You don't want to fight back. But they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me into the safe home because I have a criminal background. Kind of funny, huh? I'm trying to tell them they don't want to do what I did, don't follow in my footsteps, and they're telling me, no, you can't go see them because you have a criminal background. So one of the ladies offered to do a DVD, which is out there, and one of these days when y'all get out, you can go to YouTube and check it out. But that DVD was made and aired. The first time that it was ever seen was at the Civil Rights Museum, and it was on the day that I left Memphis to move to Virginia. So that was the first truth, that if you had told me 15 years ago that I would make a DVD and that it would be seen at the Civil Rights Museum on the day that I left to move to Virginia, I would tell you you were crazy. I don't know anybody in Virginia. But I do now, and I did at that point when I moved, of course. So that was, moving is the second truth. I would have thought, there's no way. Why Virginia? I don't know anybody in Virginia. Virginia always seemed like it was a reach, I guess. I never thought about being so close to the capital, so close to the heart of our country, or that's what you hear all of the time. But I am, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that, to get an interstate compact as someone who has committed first-degree murder is pretty big. Pretty big. They just usually don't let murderers leave the state, but they did me. The third truth is that I would work for an attorney. Now, I don't know about y'all. Okay, I do know about y'all. We don't like attorneys much. Don't have very many good experiences with attorneys, especially court-appointed. So when I applied for the job here at Sensei, I didn't know it was owned by an attorney. And so when I applied, I came in and everything, did the interview, they offered me a position, and that's when I found out that I was going to be working for an attorney. And I was kind of a little concerned about that, but it has turned out to be a very good experience, and I'm happy that I jumped out of the box and went for it. I have a really nice job. As you can tell, I work in a nice place, and I owe it all to Ruth Paley and the skills that she taught me. So that's one of the reasons why I recommend that you learn a skill. There are all types of opportunities there in prison. Learn from them. It'll reward you in the end, I promise. And the next truth is almost hard to tell y'all, because who do we hate worse than attorneys? Cops. Yep. So guess where I volunteer all of the time? 3-4 times a year, I get to go to the Fairfax County Academy, Police Academy, and talk to the recruits. And I tell them my story. Actually, they see the DVD that I was telling you about before, and it's called Pork Chop Day. I know, funny name, but they see it, and then I go in and I talk to them, and I try to share where I came from as a battered woman, where I went to prison, and hopefully how they can be the in-between those two and stop anybody else from doing what I did. That's my sole goal when I go in. I want them to be what the victim needs. And hopefully I can give them a voice and they can understand how important it is how they treat the women or men, because men can be victims of violence and of abuse. So anyhow, I talked to them, and I really tried to put a face, instead of just all the clinical that they learned, the laws and everything. I want them to know that we hurt, that we bleed, that we have needs. Yes, sometimes we commit crimes, but we are human beings, and we can learn from those crimes. We are not the crime that was committed. We're the human that committed that crime. And most of the time, there is a reason. Is it a good reason? Not always. Most of the time it's not if you committed a crime, right? But sometimes it's self-preservation. So I try to make that a reality for them. I try to put a human face on the crime that's going on. And the DVD is used in all kinds of places. Brother Dave still uses it when he speaks. Ruth Paley uses it. The Police Academy, it's on YouTube, and who else uses it? I don't know. I know it's been seen at film festivals and all kinds of places. So hopefully it's making a difference. So those are the 4 truths. You have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to make a difference. You don't have to do what I'm doing. You don't have to get out there and talk to anybody and everybody that'll listen. Why God gave me that burn, I don't know. I just asked Him to take my life, and He did. And He put so many wonderful people in it. And He gave me a burn to talk about domestic violence and to hopefully make a difference. To help you realize that if you give your life to Him, then there's hope. There's hope, there's choices, there are things that you can do and things that you will do that will impact people around you, and you're not always, most of the time we're not aware of what we do and what we say and how it's going to affect someone else. So, I had a roommate. Her name was Barbara Toll. Barbara was very, very talented, and she was my roommate. And after we had been roommates for a while, and I finally felt comfortable enough to reach out to her and tell her my story, which I didn't tell many, because, how do you tell about something that doesn't have a name? How do you share the fact that you love someone so much that you allow them to abuse you? It's easy now. You just go, I'm a victim of domestic violence, and everybody kind of understands. But before that, I didn't have a label. There was nothing I could say. And the shame now is bad and equal to. But the shame then was worse because nobody knew. It wasn't common. So Barbara wrote a wonderful, wonderful poem for me, and I'd like to share it with y'all. She wrote it in 1984. It's killing someone you love takes a long commitment. It neither begins nor ends in a single shot. Women don't go out and buy a gun because it's pretty. We buy guns to protect ourselves and our children because the police can't or won't. Marriage in a violent, brutal fashion is a no-win, no-compromise situation. He refuses to live without you and hunts you down each time you leave. Life is not worth living like this. After yet another vigorous workout with him, the boxer, and you, the bag, you buy a gun as a last resort. Because of late, even the children are involved by the impact of his hatred. Then late one afternoon, with the bruises of the last beating still fresh, he starts again, and something inside you snaps. A female animal in the active protection of its young attacks. Yet, humaneness still controls, and if she points the gun, she begs him to leave. But the male animal, beyond the point of reason, continues in rage towards her. Now survival becomes paramount, and as the trigger is drawn tight, there is no question as to who is right or wrong. She is now a murderer, and he has once again beaten her. He is now the victim.